crumple a little more paper until the end of the show. It's covered.
My house is a disaster. We've been painting for 2 days. The painters have been there, and I left it.
Right now, start with number 1. Could you give us a 5 count for audio, man, please?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Great, y'all pass the test. You can stay.
Okay. I use my fingers.
How long are you doing this?
Till January 2nd. Wow, Jack
Need one
has
more
his time
level
off.
check from you, please.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
I don't like to always talk philosophically about my liberalism. I like to actually practice it. It's very hard to do.
No, Peter, I didn't.
We don't have. We don't.
Helping Your Sexually Abused Child. This booklet will soon be distributed to every office of the Ministry of Social Services. Tonight, part 2 of our series on how victims of abuse can find help. Coming up, Peta Hammersley, parent support worker and co-author of the booklet. But first, childcare in the 80s and into the 90s. Should we have a fully subsidized childcare system? What's available now? Tonight, 3 experts on bringing up baby. Penny Coates of the BC Daycare Action Coalition, Peter Ashmore from Information Daycare, and Barb Waterman, mother and child care worker. Sitting in for Jack Webster, Iona Campanolo.
And welcome to the Webster Show. And tonight we're going to look at childcare, daycare, and we're going to spend a little bit of time assessing the fact that this is a question, I think, that its moment has arrived. Not only that, there have been 2 studies, 2 really royal commissions engaged in this matter, and they both cost more than $1 million, several $1 million each. The last one's going to be reported sometime in February. It's been delayed again. Everyone's talking about childcare. What are they doing about it? Well, we're going to ask our guests. First of all, Barb Waterman, welcome to the show. And we also have Penny Coates and Peter Ashmore. I'm going to start with you, Barb. Tell me, how did you get involved in the business of being a child care professional?
It started 12 years ago. I was a single mother on welfare, and I was a volunteer at Spare Time Fun Center. And it was very difficult to get off welfare.
Why?
Well, I was on a program that I could make an extra $100 a month. And when the daycare center was in a position to start paying me, it was not as much, and that $100 would make the difference. And it took about 6 months before the welfare would finally just give me the same amount that I would be making staying on welfare.
But you would think, you know, they would want to enhance the pride that a person feels in going out and making a living and paying for their child.
It wasn't written down in the policy. That was the problem.
And so it's a bit of a treadmill that you get onto.
That's exactly right. There was no policy for it.
I suppose since then you've met many young women with the same problems.
Very much so.
So now you're a happily married mother again.
Yeah.
And how have things changed?
The subsidy rates haven't gone up very much for parents. I still am having parents coming in, not able to afford the child care center, going out for trying to get the subsidy, being turned down or sent back because maybe they don't have the right information. Just even making an appointment to get subsidy is difficult.
So you are one of those who are running now 7 child care centers. And as I understand it, there are 300,000 children in British Columbia who need daycare, and only 17,000 licensed places for them to go. Penny, perhaps you could tell us about the political side of childcare.
Well, at this particular point, we are looking at a huge discrepancy between the need and the ability to meet that need. In BC at the moment, childcare is simply subsidized through daycare subsidies to low-income parents, or through a child care tax deduction of $2,000 of receipts. And no other funds are available. There are no startup grants, there are no operating grants, no equipment grants, and so groups who would like to start up a daycare center in their local community really have a very, very difficult time.
Peter Ashmore, isn't this something like the way all the other social services began on the kitchen tables and in the basements of our country? Isn't childcare running that way now for the greater part of the time?
Well, we've probably moved one or two steps away from a kind of mid-20s, mid-30s approach to childcare. We had, of course, a major explosion of childcare during the war years when there were a number of centers, women working centers were established, and many parents and children experienced childcare. Immediately after the war, we really went back to a non-system in most places. And really only in the 70s did we see again a real increase in the numbers of child care centers in response to changes that were happening in our society for families. But as Penny has said, that the numbers of centers, the numbers of spaces, especially licensed spaces, have not kept pace at all with the demand.
You know, I remember that business of the 50s. Childcare at that time seemed to be just about ready to happen. And I recall one of the arguments of the day was that women would feel unfulfilled if they did not nurture their own children. And of course, everyone would love to stay home. But what do you say, Barb, when you have to answer people who say, why should my tax dollars go to help some other person's child be cared for when I'm caring for my own kids at home?
What do I say? I say that maybe that person isn't in a position to care for their own child. Maybe financially they can't, or maybe emotionally they can't care for their child. And all the children are our future.
Yes. And I wonder, are any studies done, Penny, on what it's going to cost us if we don't move to a better child care system than we have? We know that the Katie Cook report, roughly $11 billion by the year 2001. You've said that that's far too much, that it can be done for less. Tell us how much you think it will cost, and tell us what you think the political fallout will be if we don't move to child care in this country.
Well, let me deal with that part first. In the States, a recent study looked at what the value of putting dollars into early childhood was. And they reckoned that for every dollar that was put into early childhood programs, quality early childhood programs, $4.75 were saved in remedial education costs, juvenile delinquency costs, criminal costs, emergency crisis family services kinds of costs, and ongoing poverty costs. I think that's really significant. So while the $11 billion that Katie Cook talks about is to provide care for every Canadian child, and she covers a wide range of needs for at-home parents and through to full-time working parents.
Was that the thrust of your remarks to the new task force when you met with them?
I certainly, in the BC Daycare Action Coalition, our presentation discussed this, the long-term kinds of costs that would happen if we didn't invest in this system.
I understand you have a very important meeting coming up with the Minister of Social Services very soon in Victoria. How did that come about?
Well, we've been asking for a meeting for a long time.
How long?
Well, I'm not sure when the last meeting ever was, to be perfectly honest. I think the last meeting with a minister on daycare really was back in the mid-70s when the NDP were in power.
That could be 11 years ago. Surely you haven't been waiting 11 years to talk about childcare.
Pretty close. I've been involved in the BC Daycare Action Coalition for 5 years, and we have been asking for 5 years while I have been involved for a meeting. And so we have a meeting tomorrow, and I'm very excited about it.
Well, that's wonderful. I think everybody feels very excited for you, and you've got certainly a great deal of data to give them. What about latchkey kids? Do you have part-time daycare as well, Peter?
Well, latchkey is actually something that, a term and a kind of service that Barb knows a lot about. I would use, and I think most of us use the term school-age childcare. It's one of the areas I think that there are probably not enough services. It's one of the areas that has experienced some growth. I think it's one of the areas of new understanding. I think parents.
How does a person go about choosing a place to put their child in daycare? What are the criteria by which you judge such a place?
Well, I think the first thing parents need to do is plan ahead as much as they can, so that they're not caught at the last minute and forced to make choices of and from only one center.
But how do you assess the facility? What do you do when you walk into one?
Well, I think the first thing that I would do, I think there's a feeling to a good center. I think that there's a kind of sense that you have that this is a good place for children. The children are actively engaged with themselves, talking to teachers, with a rich array of equipment, and there's a kind of a hum, to sometimes a quiet hum, sometimes a noisy one. But there is a feeling, I think, that parents can have about a good center.
Well, I'm sure there are lots of parents want to ask all of you questions, so we'll be back in just a few moments for those questions on the phones after the break. Back again here with our child care professionals. And as a panel, you have a lot of information to give us, but one point I didn't hit before we went to the break was the bureaucratic hassles that you can get into just by wanting to have your child cared for. Barb, would you like to give us some examples?
If you're a parent that can't afford childcare and need to go and apply for a subsidy, first of all, the maximum subsidy rates for childcare are far below what an actual center charged in most cases, or what they should be charging. A parent has to apply to the Ministry of Human Resources for the subsidy by making an appointment, which in a lot of cases is very difficult to make. And sometimes they have to go through a lot just to get up the nerve to go in and apply for that.
What kind of fees do people actually pay? I've heard as much as a private school at times.
Well, I think that the average fee that we have seen in this province that Katie Cook came up with was $3,450 a year. But here in Vancouver, it can vary anything from $230 for 3 to 5 year old care up to $525 for infant care. If you just quickly jump outside of the province for a moment, in Ottawa they're paying $800 a month for infant care. So you can see there's a huge wide range of things that are happening.
I've heard that unlicensed care also doesn't get the subsidy. Is that correct?
Well, here in British Columbia, we're the one and only province where some subsidies can go into unlicensed care. You can, if a caregiver is only taking 2 children, which is the legal maximum amount to not be licensed, then you can get approval to have your subsidy paid to that person. And in exceptional circumstances, you can have an in-home caregiver come into your home and get subsidy. But again, these subsidies are, particularly in the Vancouver area, but even in other parts of the province, substantially behind the actual cost of care.
Yes.
And where they're fairly equal to the cost of care, staff are making up the difference in low salaries.
That's what I was going to say, Peter. Obviously, in childcare in Canada, staff is being paid very poorly.
Well, I think they are, and as Penny has suggested, in real terms, probably subsidizing the cost of care. In most centers, almost 85% of the budget goes to salaries, and in centers where the fee is closer to the subsidy level, really at an unrealistic level, the staff are paid
Minimum wage.
Minimum wage or less. Well,
Or
we're going to go
thereabouts.
to the phones and see what the people have to say. Go ahead.
Yes, my opinion of child care is that it should take its place in the home. And the government spending money to set up centers is providing a babysitting service. And any government that will continue to do that would not continue to get my vote. However, if they would subsidize the family so that they can stay at home and together and get the care that they need from parents, then I'm prepared to support it. I'd like to hear the people's opinion on that.
Thank you. We'll ask Penny Coates, who is the political activist. Penny, what's your response?
Well, I think that our response is that there are children out there who need care, and to try and revert everyone back to the home is not realistic in terms of the changing needs of families. But I would agree with the caller that one needs a whole range of options here. It should be possible for those parents who want to be able to stay home with their child, to provide a caregiver in their own home, the spouse, to do that. And we need to look at those kinds of options. And our coalition looks at that sort of angle as well. And we talk
you
about
define
things
the
like
changing needs of-
guaranteed income and in terms of extended parental leave. But the other side of that is that there are children who, parents who for financial reasons choose or need to be out in the workforce, and we have to provide something. And if we don't, we're going to pay the long-term
Well,
cost.
the character of the family has changed, and the caller was trying to get our attention there to say, how do you define the changing needs of the family? So perhaps we could have a little more on that.
In terms of the changing needs of the family, I think that it's significant that in 1982, which is the latest study that I have my fingers on, it was considered that half the number of two-parent families would double below the poverty line if one of the spouses quit work. So we're not talking about all sorts of people who are going out there to get their second Cadillac and their third fur coat. We're talking about people who want, who have to go out to work to make basic needs.
Thank you, caller. I'm going to move along. You're on the air.
Hi, I just wanted to express that people should be able to go out and earn their living and live a standard that's, you know, not below any kind of level. But what I do have an aversion to is people who use daycares to dump their children, people who, quote unquote, can't handle it, people who have their kids in for social reasons. What I think I'd like to see is a better utilization of community resources rather than private daycare systems, Boys and Girls Club, neighborhood houses, community centers. I think those things would probably be an awful lot more effective for both the child and the parent.
Thank you for your call. I'll direct your question to Barb Waterman.
In childcare, I don't think there's very many parents that use centers to dump their children, first of all. And if there are a few that are putting their children in centers for that reason, I think maybe it's better the children are in the center.
Yes, thank you for your call. Certainly there are mothers when they are really tied down with children who could use a few hours off,
That's
and I don't think we should deny them that. We're going to go to another caller now. Go ahead, you're on the air.
Hello. We already run daycare in a sense. We have two children of our own, a 2-year-old and 4-year-old, and we take care of two children the same age. And we have two questions. We would like to know how many children we're allowed to take care of in our home, and we'd also like to know, are there any funds available if we would like to expand and take on more children?
Thank you. Peter Ashmore?
Well, basically your question is perhaps about the difference between unlicensed care and licensed family daycare, and certainly providing care to your own two children and two children from outside of the home is what Penny and I call an unlicensed family daycare, and perfectly appropriate. If you're thinking to provide care to more children, in BC up to 5 preschool-age children and perhaps 1 or 2 school-age children, then you would go through the licensing procedure. Best to contact your local health department. And I guess the second part of your question, are there funds available to help you with this expansion? I guess at this point, unfortunately not.
No. Thank you, sir. Moving along to long distance here, Bowen Island. Go ahead, please.
I was in the kindergarten and daycare field, and you know, we have lost some very fine supervisors, and men in particular, because they now feel that it's too dangerous an occupation, because we're now expected, the insurance companies want us to have a malpractice insurance after this case with Peter Pan. And the tragedy is that she was found absolutely not guilty, but she's lost her daycare center, her assets, her RRSPs, everything.
I think it's ruined her life, hasn't it?
It has, and I think it's just absolutely dreadful.
I think I'll direct that to Peter, since he's the only man here.
You know, it costs an awful lot of money.
Go ahead, Peter.
Well, I guess there are two questions there. One, the men in daycare issue, and the second, the cost of liability insurance for daycare centers. I think there have never been, as I'm sure you're aware, very many men working in daycare, preschool settings.
Oh.
Although I think we're seeing a change there. I would hope, and I really do hope, that what I think is a temporary adjustment will not scare men away. I think our centers and programs are learning to deal better, and our social services system better, with the concerns about abuse. And we are going to see more men in childcare, though I think that comes back fundamentally to the question of wages. I think it's probably the low wage.
Yes, if I can jump in here.
But the thing is this, that there is a terrific risk, it seems to me, to operate in a daycare center. I mean, if you're going to be falsely accused of heaven knows what, it seems to me that it is a dangerous occupation.
I think national regulations will help that some. Further licensing and definition will continuously add to the and proper training as well. I think adequate training would weed out some of the people who might be unsuitable.
People are more than adequately trained.
Yeah.
But they're not properly paid either. Well, thank you for your call. I'm afraid I have to go to the break. We may continue this right after. And so we're going to be talking a little bit more about what kind of people can work and what liabilities they may run into right after the break. Back again on childcare. You wanted to make a point, Penny?
I wanted to make a point about unlicensed care. Peter was talking about that it's perfectly legitimate to take on 2 children, and many people do take on 2 children that are not related to them by blood or marriage, and that is legal in this province. What is of real concern is some of the horror stories that you hear of people taking on many more children than that, and yet not going through the regular licensing procedure, not having any training, and not providing a good environment for children.
But surely it's up to the parent or guardian to find out what kind of an institution or home they're putting their child in, isn't it?
I agree, but what's happened in our situation is when there are only spaces for 7% of the children who need them, you don't always have options.
So they go to desperate measures.
They go to desperate measures. And if I can take an example of a woman, I was in the post office the other day, and she saw me walking around with something that said daycare on it, and she came up to me in a real panic and said, I have been through 9 different caregivers with my child, and my child is only a year old.
Oh.
I have to work. And she started listing off the reasons. The first woman got sick, very legitimate reason. The second woman was not taking proper care of her child. She moved it again. The third woman, the husband got transferred, so they were no longer, and it went on. But this is just, I mean, this is outrageous in our society.
Well, it can be changed. Let's go to the phones and see what they have to say. You're on the air.
Yes, I guess I have a number of points to make. One of them is I'm a mom myself. My wife works.
Hooray for you. Good.
And I'm looking at going back to work because it's more work staying at home with the child than it is working.
There are a lot of men finding that out. Go ahead.
The child is 7 months old, and we're having trouble finding a daycare that will take a child under a year old. Okay, so that's my first question is where would I look to find services to look after our child?
Peter?
And the second is, I think politicians could do a lot more to try to bring the private sector into working with daycare and trying to remove it from the social services so that the private sector could, for example, supply daycare as almost another benefit to the employee so that she would be able to stay at work and at the same time may be able to take advantage of some tax benefits by supporting some of the licensed daycares. One of them, which I see as a good opportunity, would be, take for example, Van City Credit Union, which has Vancouver daycare located right behind it. Okay, and I understand that the daycare is having a real trouble trying to keep themselves above board. And anyway.
Well, Penny's champing at the bit to answer you, and also 70% of the needs of childcare are in low-income families, 5% in the middle class, and the rest in the upper class who write it off in part as a tax deduction. So, Penny?
I think there's a real place for the private sector to play in terms of being involved with the community and with parents, and I think this is important, to develop some services. And so you're seeing hospitals, for instance, getting involved in providing space while the employees themselves actually run the daycare center. And so those are some ways that they can get involved. The private sector per se,
Would they
taking
find it
it on.
profitable?
No, it's not profitable. This is not a profit issue.
I think the benefit to an employer is not in terms of profit,
No.
but in terms of what they offer to their workforce, the ability to retain
That's right.
valuable employees, to attract
Security
new
of workers.
employees,
Yeah. Yeah.
and not only those issues, but the security that they provide to their employees. People who are at work working, not at work worrying about their child care arrangement, worrying that their caregiver is not doing a good job, or the kids are at home watching
Well, it adds
TV.
to productivity.
I think so. That's the benefit, not so much a profit out of the
Childcare is not a
daycare.
place for profit. If you are providing quality, which means you are giving a good, strong program to the children, you are paying your staff well, it's a very labor-intensive kind of service. And it's not a place where profit can be made without cutting into the quality of care that is
I
provided.
saw a statistic the other day that said if childcare in this country was put into, enacted tomorrow, that would mean something like 630,000 new jobs, almost overnight. But of course, if they're paid as badly as they are now, they won't want them. Let's go to the phones. Go ahead, please.
Yes, you've just been touching on the area that I wanted to talk about, and that's employers providing daycare for employees. I'm planning on starting up a new company, and that's exactly what I want to do. But what regulations, what requirements would I have to meet to
Let
be
me
able
put you in touch with Peter Ashmore. I'm sure that he can help you.
Well, I think, in response to your call and the earlier callers, and I hope that we're really at a threshold in BC. We have had very little employer involvement in childcare issues, and I think, certainly from the calls that I'm getting, the couple of calls that we've had today, that there is a new interest, a new awareness. In terms of the regulatory environment that you face, your daycare center, any employer's daycare center, must, like all programs, meet the regulations, the provincial regulations, the provincial child care facilities regulations. That being said, go at it. More power to you.
Thank you for your call. Going long distance, Victoria, you're on the air.
Hello. I would just like to point out that when I did work, I had 2 children in daycare, and it was costing me anywhere from $400 to $450 a month. And my job did not pay me that much more. So it wasn't even feasible, really, for me to have a job.
That's what happened to Barb Waterman, and that's why she got in the business. Would you like to comment?
Oh, I would like to start my own daycare. About it myself. But another thing is the daycare that I did have, if my children were there half a day, I was still charged a full day. Now, one thing I have pointed out as well is the fact that if I go back to work now, I now have 3 children. I'm looking at $600 to $800 a month for daycare. In order for me to take a job, that job has to pay me $8 to $9 an hour. So, you know, who's going to hire me at that wage when I'm trying to get back into the workforce? That is a big problem right there.
That's why I called it a treadmill when we started. Barb, do you want to just make a comment?
Yes.
Thank you for your call.
So far, daycares have had a problem meeting the needs of parents that have 2 or more children, because each space is licensed, and you have a budget that you have to work for. If you start giving breaks to parents that have 2 or 3 children, then again your income is lower.
That's right. It goes round and round like a vicious
with no
circle.
operating grants, it's
That's right.
impossible for daycare centers to really meet part-time needs. If I can just use myself as an example for a moment, I work on a sort of part-time basis. I have chosen to spend as much time with my child as I can, but I also feel like I have taken from the community a lot in terms of my education, et cetera, and I want to put back some of the skills that I do have. So I try and work 10 to 20 hours a week in the various things that I do. I have to use 6 different kinds of childcare arrangements to meet my particular needs, because a lot of my work is weekends or evenings or whatever. It's just not possible for daycare centers to meet the needs of part-time people at this point when scheduling that is so difficult. They only have user fees, and that's all they can rely on.
Well, there is so much more we could say. I'm really sorry that we've run out of time because there's so many people want to talk with you, but I thank you all for being on the show today, and I hope that we will gradually come to a time when childcare is a fact, a fait accompli, and is working for people as it should be. So thank you, and we'll see you again, and I'll be back after the break with Peter Hammersley. Back again, this time with Peter Hammersley, and she's co-author with Louise Doyle of this book, Helping Your Sexually Abused Child. This is a follow-up to yesterday's program on sexual and physical abuse, and this has been approved by Claude Richmond, Minister of Social Services and Housing. And I think first off we should tell people, where can they get it, Peter?
They can get it from the Act II Society, which is downtown Vancouver, and the address is on the back of the book. Maybe we can read that out to them.
Yes, so they can get this from Suite 301-402 West Pender, Vancouver, and the phone number is 685-7357. What happens in a family after disclosure of a sexual or physical abuse?
After the disclosure and the interview with both social worker and the RCMP, hopefully both together so the child doesn't have to tell their story over and over, they are then usually referred to some sort of counseling agency, and in Region 19 where I work, it is the Act II counseling. And we work there both with the child and with the non-offending parents. And we do also counsel and support the non-offending parents in the home. We find that by the time they've come to us, they've had so many different appointments to make and deadlines to meet that it's nice to have someone to come in and talk to them in the comfort of their own home.
What are the emotions they experience? They must be absolutely terribly upset.
Extremely upset. We all feel that this is something that does not happen to us. It happens in other families. We tend to believe as a society it happens in lower class families, but in fact it goes right across the board. And parents go into shock, just as if they'd been in a car accident. They go through the denial, the disbelief, the anger, the sorrow, and eventually they can work around to the acceptance.
And how does it come about? How does a child begin to say something and then is it all over, or does it go on?
No, usually when the child first discloses, and often it's not to mom, it's to a neighbor or to his teacher.
Or to a friend.
That's right, yeah. And that is just the very beginning. Our experience is what the child tells in the initial interview with the social worker and the RCMP is just the tip of the iceberg.
So how does the person handle the situation? Do they do it all alone?
In many cases, yes. Where they're not within an area such as Region 19 and our outlying areas of BC, they do handle it very much alone.
Do they go to their doctor, or how do they begin to seek assistance?
Well, they start out with the Ministry of Social Services and Housing, and they look after the protection of the child and will guide them through the process to a degree. But I think, as we all know, everybody is overworked, and hence is why Louise Doyle and myself found that parents really needed something. They needed something right at the time of disclosure. And this booklet contains, hopefully, all the information that they will be seeking, put together in a short booklet, which they could sit down and read in an hour or two.
But we're talking, Peter, about people who generally don't deal with the law, generally never go to court. What happens to them?
It's all very strange, and what happens to them is they become very confused, extremely confused. I find that the parents are usually just like robots. They're doing what has to be done, and they're hoping that what they're being told is the right thing to do because it's a totally strange system to them. They're not used to having to deal with the ministry or the RCMP and then on to court cases and so on and so forth.
Well, do parents feel paranoid? Do they think that the world is against them?
They feel very much alone. They feel like they are the only ones whose child has been sexually abused, although
do they blame themselves?
Often they blame themselves, and often they use hindsight. They look back and they say, I should have known. Johnny or Susie were trying to tell me, and now I can see that they were. They go over their own parenting skills. They think that somehow they must have not given that child what they needed.
So there's an awful lot of stress on the family. What happens to the child?
The child often feels that they wish in many ways they hadn't said anything because everything is happening. What the child actually wants is for it to stop. If it's daddy, for daddy to stop abusing, for daddy to be normal daddy.
Or whoever.
That's right. And for the child, it's confusing.
It sounds like a terribly painful undertaking from beginning to end, and it's really very difficult to talk about it. So this small book that you've written with your co-author is a way of helping. What made you write the book? What made you do this?
For both Louise and myself, it was the work that we were doing at Act Two with both the non-offending parents and the children. And the more we worked with the children, we found that the mothers and fathers who were getting the support, the encouragement, the understanding, the nurturement that they needed, their children responded so much faster to counseling.
And what advice do you give parents when they have to go to court?
To support their child, to, if they're angry, they have a right to be angry, but not to show that anger in front of their child or around their child. Children misconstrue it and they feel that the anger is towards themselves.
And I suppose there are also a whole realm of emotions attached to the offender.
A lot of anger towards the offender, and usually the non-offending parents have that anger, but not always does the child have that anger. Like I said earlier, the child just wants it to stop. Sometimes they do have a lot of anger, though, and they need to be able to let that out.
What symptoms should parents look for to, if they can get an early view, if there is abuse going on?
One that comes to mind right off the bat is inappropriate sexual talk. If you hear your child making sexual comments or maybe playing with another child in a way that is beyond their years is a great indicator. Nightmares, sleep disturbances, problems with sleeping, sometimes eating disturbances. It's very hard for parents to know because also a lot of these indicators are the same as children who've got learning disabilities or other problems in their life.
And the children have depression, and the children move into withdrawal from society.
Yeah, we see that more so in the early teens and the latter teens.
And so, if a parent suspects there is something wrong, what action do they take?
My advice is to ask your child, has anybody touched you in a way that you feel uncomfortable? Children understand the feeling of, I don't really know whether it's okay or not, and to be very open with them, and if they don't understand the area, you know, and they feel uncomfortable with explaining, you know, the genitals, use the bathing suit area, and just be really open and check in with them on and off, and how are they feeling about things generally, and playing what-if games.
I see. Well, we'll see what the people on the phones have to say after the break. Back with Peter Hammersley and a survival booklet for parents of sexually abused children. Peter, we're going to go to the phones and see what people have to say to you. Go ahead.
Hello, Peter?
Go ahead.
Yes, Peter? Yes, I was wondering if you could tell me if you have any information on when a person or people are wrongly accused of child sexual abuse.
Well, it's been our experience that by the time they get to us at Act Two, that it has been well checked out, and usually the child is telling the truth. We've had very few situations where the child has not told the truth, and I can understand the dilemma, but we have not had a lot of experience with that, other than going through the family court process.
Well, I do know of someone who that happened to, and when the person, there was an accusation made, the first thing they did was check the person's own two children. And two children were found not to be abused. And then the child that was supposed to have been abused was checked and was found not to be sexually abused. And I'm just wondering if people realize what can happen when a person is wrongly accused and go through this without any, you know, this person didn't have any legal...
Nothing to fall back on.
Sorry?
Yes. Well, thank you for your call.
Thank you.
We're going to go to Nanaimo now. Go ahead, Nanaimo.
Hello, it's Colette from Kelowna.
Oh, Kelowna. Go ahead, Kelowna.
Hello.
Go ahead. You're on the air, sir.
Oh, yeah, I'm just having...
Can't hear you. Go ahead.
I'm having a hard time believing that those problems are as widespread as...
Turn your television off. If Jack Webster was here, he'd cut you off the air right now. I'm going to be kind to you and leave you on. Now.
Yeah, I can't help but think that these type of shows are doing a lot to promote a problem that isn't as prevalent as it is in reality.
Well, that would be really nice, but our findings are, in fact, it is the stats that we have that we've used in our booklet is 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys.
Sure, but one booklet surely isn't the all-encompassing solution.
Oh, well, sir, yesterday we had a program on this, too. We're just talking about parents today, and it's just a little bit of extra to what we had yesterday. There are a whole broad realm of assistance programs.
But don't you think that there's too many of those things, and these are actually going to impregnate thoughts that previously weren't in the minds of young people?
What's your answer, Peter?
No, I disagree with you, and I feel that the care kit, feeling yes, feeling no, is arming our children. And as was mentioned on the show yesterday, we teach our little child to swim so that they won't drown, and we teach our child's protection against sexual abuse so they won't be abused.
Sexual abuse is a disgusting thing, but
I agree.
If there's a lot of, for the most part, most parents are very responsible, but don't you think this is being overexposed?
Well, it's finally come out of the closet, and I guess that people are not afraid to talk about it for the first time in a very long time.
Yeah, no, the problem should be solved, but don't you? There seems to be an inappropriateness to the expansion of energy that seems to be perpetuating a monologue, and I just can't help but think this is going to have an effect on all young minds.
Maybe it's a response to the amount of pornography we have in society today, too. This is the other side in some cases, isn't it, Peter?
Well, pornography, that's a totally...
Yeah. Well, we're not going to go into that subject today, sir. Thank you for your call. Moving on to Nanaimo. You're on the air. Nanaimo, you still there?
Yes, I am.
Go ahead.
Okay, with this hotline, when the child complains, they are automatically right. There is no investigation on the home life or the family life. The child has complete, what they do is right. I'd like to know why there's no more investigation into the parents in the family life.
Well, my experience is that yes, there is investigation into the family life, but also the experience of professionals is that children do not lie. They may not tell the whole truth, they leave portions out. In fact, there was a study done in the United States of 8 children. And of those 8 children being put on the lie detector test, 1 child did not pass. And when they investigated it farther, she hadn't told everything, more had happened. And when children report, they are believed because they have a right to be safe. And sometimes they are confused in who it is. But our experience is that they do not lie.
Well, I have found that I've had personal contact, and I know that there was no investigation done. The welfare did absolutely nothing to help the mother other than hinder her. The father was completely blacklisted. To me, it just seems that there should have been a lot more investigating done in all cases than what there is done.
Well, it's hard for me to say on a particular case because I don't have all the details. If I had the details, I'd be much
and it rather
better
ties
able
in
to.
with the earlier call, too, in that people are just beginning to formulate ways of dealing with this problem now. And they have been dealt with under the table for years.
That's right.
Well, thank you for your call. We're going on now. You're on the air.
Good afternoon. I'd just like to ask the caller that was up here a couple of seconds ago just what sort of a feeling he'd have if he found out one of his children was sexually abused.
Have you ever had that experience, sir?
No.
Do you know anyone who has?
Yes, I do.
And what was the reaction in the family?
Disbelief.
That's what
and
Peter...
then shock, and you go through all the symptoms.
And how did they survive? Has this been some time now?
Yes, it has.
Did they have something like this to help them and people to help them, or did they have to do it alone?
Did it alone.
How is the child?
Fine. Yeah, just fine now. But I wonder if this gentleman that called earlier that feels that the whole thing is blown out of proportion would feel a little differently if he had his own sort of situation to...
Yeah, I think you have a point, and I think it backs up also what I said earlier, is that we do not expect it to happen in our family. That happens in other families, not ours.
That's right. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we're going to go on to another call there. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I would just like to say that the more exposure we can get to children that are being sexually abused, the better off everybody is.
So you disagree with the man from the Okanagan who says there's too much?
I went straight to my phone when I heard that one. I am just bouncing here. I have a daughter who has been sexually abused, and I didn't think it would happen in my family. And it can happen in your own backyard.
How did you find out?
My daughter came to me.
This is what Peter tells us in the book, and her co-writer.
Children do not lie, Peter. I definitely agree with you.
Yeah.
And there is, if parents, please, I plead with parents to listen to their children.
Thank you for your call.
Thank you.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, I was wondering, how would you prevent sexual abuse to your children? Like, how would you tell them about it so that it doesn't happen to them?
Okay, in our school system we have the Care Kit, which is designed in Surrey, and it uses little hand puppets, and the teachers present it to the children over a period of a few sessions. There's also the Feeling Yes, Feeling No program, which was done by the Green Thumb players. There are also books that you can buy in the bookstores that are on Safe Touch and Bad Touch. They'll be in the libraries if you can't afford to go to the store and buy them. There's coloring books, and to sit down with your child, to read it, to color with them, to talk about it, and have it as an open subject. As long as we keep speaking openly about sexual abuse, our children know they can come to us and say something.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. This has been a very interesting adjunct to yesterday's show, and we hope there are not too many people going to have this help, but we're glad that you created it. And thank you for being on the show. I'll be back after the break. We have a jam-packed show for you tomorrow. That goldfish that swallowed the whale, PWA and CPR, we'll have the CEO, Don Carty, here to tell you all about it. We have victims of the CIA brainwashing in the 50s, and in addition, we have Dignity in Death, the Dying with Dignity program that has been talked about a lot in British Columbia. And so I'm asking you to stay tuned now for the news and tune in tomorrow for Webster. I'll be here at 5 p.m. precisely.